Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to 2 Kings, chapter 11, in which there are 21 verses. And the title of this video is The House of the King and the Temple of Hashem. They are two distinct places. Verse 1, the seed royal. The footnote reads, seed of the kingdom. Verse 4, continuous difference of, it says of the Hori, or the Kori, however you want to pronounce that, it's Greek. It means, in the Hebrew, guards, means guards. And the Rasim, which is also Hebrew for runners. And we see captains and guard. Okay, so Hori means guards, whereas it's, in any case, it seems to be switched up a little bit here in terms of the words. So captains is Kori. Okay, Kori is captains. That actually should be guards, according to the footnote anyway. And guard, which is rendered as roots, in the Hebrew, that should be runners. It's rendered as guards. We have our first big difference of the chapter, and this is an omission of a covenant of Hashem. So this is important because it says here, Jehoiada made a covenant of Hashem with them. It's not simply a regular covenant. It's not a personal covenant that he made, as the Masoretic seems to allude to, that he just made a covenant with them that was a covenant that is outside of Hashem. No, it includes Hashem. And there's an addition. This is a redundancy of in the house of Hashem. Okay, so I think what is happening here is the Masoretic is associating Hashem with the house, not so much the covenant that was made. Verses 5 to 6, there is an omission of in the porch. And then it says the highway, or the gate of the highway, but the highway, the word highway is sur in the Masoretic. We see footmen again versus guard. Going to notice that continuous difference throughout. Verse 8, weapon versus weapons. Then we see the word ranges. What is a range? This is in both. It's ranges in both translations, but what this is referring to is the rows or ranks that anyone that enters into these rows shall be put to death. They are not part of the official rows of people, of officials. Verse 9, there's an omission of wise. So Jehoiada is wise. That is the adjective that has been linked to him, versus priest. So it's linking Jehoiada as the priest. Verse 10, swords versus shields. Continuous difference of house of Hashem versus the temple of Hashem. Verse 12, he brought forth, actually it's not he, it's the second he made him king versus they made him king. And this is an interesting observation I made here. They clapped hands, or they clapped their hands as a response to this event. So applause is applause an ancient practice? That's something I want to research. Okay, so applause has been linked to having its origins in ancient Rome and in ancient Greece, specifically the 6th century BC. Lawmaker Cleisthenes of Athens made it so that audiences would have to clap in approval of their leader since there were too many people to meet individually. So that is how they communicated their approval, the audience members. Through this came the applause, the unified voices of all these people in the form of clapping together in admiration. 100 years later, in the 4th century BC, came the clacker. A clacker was a person who was hired by theaters and shows to clap, cry, or laugh at the right moments in order to influence the audience's reactions. Think of TV, where they have the pre-recorded laugh track and so on. In the 4th century Athens, competition was fierce between comedians, and clackers became a common way to sway the decision of the judges and be awarded best performance. That sounds corrupt to me. In the Roman Empire, the practice of using applause to influence was applied to politics, and clackers were found in both courts of law and private art demonstrations. Roman Emperor Nero even established a school of applause with a clack of thousands of knights and soldiers following his concert tours. So clapping has its origins, again, 600 years BC to 400 BC, okay? So that is that. So that is interesting to do that research in regards to clapping their hands. But if we rewind even further, we can see, no, it actually predates that by a lot more. In 2 Kings, this is even older than that. Let's try to get the date for this. So this time period was around the time of Jehoash. His reign was around 800 years BC. So this predates the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans by at least 400 years. So we can see, yeah, there's definitely an ancient origin of clapping, of applause. And this is probably the earliest recorded human history of people applauding en masse. And this is the only instance, as far as I can recall, of applause being mentioned in the Holy Scriptures, whether we're talking about the Tanakh or the Apostolic Scriptures. Okay, so that's all for talking about applause anyway. So it is indeed an ancient practice, as we can see. And they said, "Long live the king," en masse. It's not one person saying this. This is all of them having a sort of chant, a cheer, versus "God save the king" in the Masoretic. Verse 13, Athaliah heard the sound of the people, versus she heard the noise of the guard and of the people. But she didn't just hear the noise of the people, the sound of them. Specifically, this is referring to the sound of the people running. There's a commotion. So that is what she heard. Verse 14, singers versus princes. So these are musicians and vocalists, not princes and trumpeters. Or I should say not only trumpeters, but also including singers. And they were before the king, not near the king. They were in front of him. And this is what Athaliah had cried out. She said, a conspiracy versus treason. The word is kasher, which means an unlawful conspiracy or an unlawful confederacy, an unlawful alliance. So we can see, again, multiple meanings in the Hebrew. Verse 15, bring her forth versus bring her, have her forth. Verse 16, here we see the distinction made. Maybe the title of this video should be applause, not the distinction, but there's a number of topics. So they laid hands upon her, Athaliah, and went in by the way of the horse's entrance into the house of Hashem, and she was slain there. So they went in by the way of the horse's entrance. So they weren't exactly in the house of Hashem, but they went in by way. Oh no, they did go into the house of Hashem, and they killed her there. But it says, "Let her not, however, be slain in the house of Hashem." Okay, so how do we reckon this? So don't kill her there in the house of Hashem. But in the Masoretic, it says they killed her in the king's house. But the only way to explain it, to rationalize around this this decree of the priest, "Let her not, however, be slain in the house of Hashem." So either they went against his wishes, or they took her and they went in by the way. So this is the road of the horse's entrance into the house. So they are not in the house, they're in the road leading to the house, but it's the horse's entrance. So this most likely is a gated area, a private area, secluded, that no one else could see what is going on, and they slain her there in the way, the road of the horse's entrance. So that makes sense. They didn't technically do it in the house of Hashem, but in the road leading to the house of Hashem. In the Masoretic, they laid hands on her. She went by the way. So she didn't go. It was actually they went with her. They escorted her by the road by the which the horses came in to the king's house, so not the house of Hashem. So those are two distinct places again. But in any case, they did slain her in the way of the horse's entrance in both accounts, but one is leading to house of Hashem, the other leading to the house of the king. Verse 17 also was omitted. So why is this important? Because in the Masoretic, if we just take it at face value, we see how many covenants being made. Jehoiada making a covenant between Hashem and the king, so that's one. And then the people, that the people should make a covenant with Hashem. And between the king also and the people. Okay, so it's a little confusing if the language isn't making it clear how many covenants are made, but for sure we see one between the king and Hashem. So that's one. And the king and the people, that's two. And then between the king and the people, you would assume that would be a third one, but the language, the way it's translated, is not very clear that this is also a separate covenant. But when you include the word also, we see, no, there are three covenants being made. Again, the king and Hashem, that's one. The king and the people, two. And the king and the people. So Hashem, let's start over. Okay, let's rewind. The king, Jehoiada, and Hashem, so that's number one. The king and the people. So which king? Hashem, not Jehoiada. So that's two. And then also between Jehoiada and the people. So that's three distinct covenants being made in this verse. Verse 18, talking about the house of this name. I'm not going to say it again. That's a breach of the Torah. You're not supposed to say the names of the other Elohim. So verse 18, completely broken pieces versus broke it down, broke they in pieces thoroughly. Okay, I wouldn't say it's a wild difference, but a difference in semantics. And then we see the name of the priest. I can say this name, Mathan versus Matan. And then overseers versus officers. Verse 19, wrapping up here, it says they seated him there on the throne versus he sat on the throne. So they placed him on the throne. He did not place himself there. Verse 20, we're going to finish this chapter with a big difference. All the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was at rest, and they slew Athaliah with the sword in the house of the king. Okay, so I thought she was slain in the way to the king's house. Well, technically, uh, that was going to the king's house. So it seems to be a little bit mixed up, even in the Septuagint, to be honest. The people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet. They slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. So we have to make a distinction. Who's the king? Is it because with the covenants, we can see that the king mentioned was not King Jehoiada. This is Hashem, the king Hashem, because he's really the king. Truly, he's the king. And then we see the sword in the house of the king. So is this talking about, again, Hashem is the king? So that's the only way to understand it. Otherwise, what we read about earlier about where she was slain, the entrance into the house of Hashem. Okay, so unless this road is connected to both of these houses, it's a little confusing. So I leave that for you to judge. But in any case, she was not slain in the house of either the king or Hashem. She was slain on the way to the house. So in that road where that leads to the by the way of the horse's entrance. So she was either slain in that road or in the house of the king. So I'm going to lean towards that being the road, because the express commandment was don't slay her in the house of Hashem. That's it. That's the priest's his request. Okay, so that's all for this chapter. Thank you very much for your time. Till next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha.